I've been asked by Tropic Supply to talk to you today about our MaxiVac hoses and the methodology for pulling a more efficient vacuum. So, for a long time, a lot of technicians have used their manifolds, quarter-inch hoses, and the compound gauge on that manifold to determine and pull a vacuum. So we're going to show you another method that might be a little more efficient than that. Because when you're looking at inches water gauge on your compound gauge on your manifold set, 1 inch of water gauge is about 2,000 microns, 1,868 to be exact. So you could be pulling 29 inches and you could be off by ½ an inch and you're still miles away from where you need to be. So ARI standard is typically, the benchmark is around 500 microns. You want to achieve a vacuum of about 500 microns and then hold it and verify a decay rate for a period of time to be determined by your service manager and or your equipment manufacturer. So with that in mind, I'm going to introduce you to our MaxiVac hoses. The idea here is that we're going to take the manifold completely out of that equation. You want to make sure that you're using a micron gauge and the larger dedicated dry vacuum hoses. These are ½ inch hoses. They're dedicated for vacuum, so you're not using these for charging. The problem with this methodology here, is that we're using the same hoses that we're using to change burnouts and to charge equipment and everything else. So we've got contaminants in those hoses that we're working against right from the beginning. So this way we have dedicated dry hoses and we have much more volume in the ½ inch hoses so we can displace more molecules. Okay, so that's the name of the game. So we're going to take the manifold out of that equation and we're going to take and deadhead the hoses directly from the vacuum pump to the unit. Now, for sake of discussion today, this is my unit. I've sealed up a vessel here so that we can pull a vacuum and have some volume to draw down. And I would tell you, using a 2-valve manifold and standard hoses, quarter-inch hoses, it takes about 3 minutes for me to register on my micron gauge, which usually starts at around 20,000 microns, and it takes me ultimately about 27 minutes to pull below 500 microns. Once I put my ½ inch hoses on there and I deadhead them right through the core remover tools, we're going to remove the cores from the valves. The cores are in themselves a restriction, so you're going to want to remove those. And we're going to, we've got a 20 micron rated ball valve. You've got a 20 micron rated ball valve. And it will hit my micron gauge in about 16 or 17 seconds and generally takes about 3 minutes to pull that down to the well below 500 microns. So when I say it speeds the process up 10 times, it literally speeds that process up 10 times. On a small sample size, granted, but it gives you a point of reference. All right, so the first thing I guess we should explain is if you're not using core remover tools, you should be using core remover tools. The core remover tool is meant to do just that. It's meant to take a system that's either under vacuum or under pressure and securely remove the core without disrupting that or changing that. Obviously, if the system is dry, it doesn't matter, but you'll need to remove that restriction to get an efficient vacuum. Now, I've got 2 vacuum gauges, only for the purpose of explaining why I don't want to put my vacuum gauge on the vacuum pump itself. That's not typically where you want the vacuum gauge, with the exception of before you start, if you want to check your oil and check your vacuum pump to make sure it's up to the task, that's when I will put my vacuum gauge at the pump. But once I've established that my vacuum pump and the oil is fresh, then I will put the vacuum gauge at the unit, okay? If I'm doing a one hose method, it's gonna be on the opposite side of where I'm pulling my vacuum from. So if I'm coming into the suction side, I've got my micron gauge over on the core remover tool that's on the liquid side. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to leave the micron gauge on the vacuum pump. I'm going to leave the micron gauge on the vacuum pump, and I'm going to run my other micron gauge at the unit. At the unit is where you want. What's happening here is not indicative of what's happening here. So we'll see that once we run the unit. My valves are closed. But within a few seconds, I've pulled these hoses down below 500 microns, so I know that my oil is good and my pump is up to the task. As much as everybody feels like they need a bigger pump, a bigger pump, a bigger pump, you don't necessarily need a bigger pump. You just need to maximize what you can get out of that pump by using bigger hoses and better hose system. If we fast forward about 3 minutes, we'll have drawn that tank down to about 250 microns. So again, if you want to increase your efficiency, you don't necessarily need a bigger pump, but I would suggest to you to remove the manifold from that process. Manifolds are great for servicing a unit, charging a unit, but when you're talking about microns are such a fine unit of measurement that every little connection, every little leak point adds up. And so we remove the manifolds from that process. We deadhead the hoses directly to the unit. We have our core remover tools, which we have magnets on, so your cores don't drop into the sand or the grass. And that speeds the processing. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for supporting Uniweld products and Tropic Supply.